Officer Daniel Harris had learned long ago that when Ranger froze, ears rigid, nose twitching, something was wrong. It didn't matter if the street looked calm, the houses quiet, or the neighborhood perfectly ordinary. If Ranger's body went stiff like that, trouble was close. The patrol car had barely rolled past Maple Street when the German Shepherd braced against the window, his deep chest rumbling with a growl. Daniel slowed instinctively, his palm hovering near the steering wheel. As he glanced out at the row of parked cars glistening under porch lights, everything looked so normal. Sprinklers clicked across neatly cut lawns. A flag stirred lazily on a front porch. Somewhere down the block, an old radio hummed faint country music. But Ranger didn't care about any of that. His amber eyes locked, forward, ears sharp, and then, just faint enough for Daniel to doubt himself, a muffled sound drifted through the night. A whimper, a child's whimper. Daniel's pulse kicked. He eased the cruiser to the curb, cut the engine, and sat in the stillness. Maybe he was imagining it. Maybe it was a stray cat or a neighbor's TV. But Ranger had already leapt from the seat, claws clicking on the pavement, muscles taut as he strained toward a dark sedan parked under a tree. Daniel stepped out after him, heart hammering harder than it should for such a quiet evening. At first glance, the sedan was nothing special. An older model, dark paint dulled by years of use, parked a little away from the rest of the cars. The windows reflected porch lights and nothing else. A paper grocery bag sat in the front seat. Everything about it screamed ordinary. But Ranger wasn't fooled. The dog circled the car twice, nose pressed low, body vibrating with urgency. He let out a sharp bark, then pawed at the trunk, claws scraping metal with a frantic rhythm. "Easy, boy," Daniel murmured, though his voice betrayed him. He shone his flashlight across the vehicle, sweeping over the license plate, the handles, the roof. No broken glass, no dents, nothing suspicious. Yet Ranger whined, pawing harder, glancing back at Daniel with the kind of pleading stare that never failed to tighten the officer's gut. And then the radio crackled inside the cruiser. Amber, alert 7-year-old girl Emily Parker, missing since late afternoon. Last seen near Jefferson Park wearing a pink shirt and denim shorts. Daniel's throat went dry. Jefferson Park was only 3 miles away. He moved closer to the sedan, trying to stay steady. "Come on, Ranger, let's check this carefully." The shepherd pressed his nose against the trunk seam, whining, then scratching again. His tail was stiff, no wag, no play. This was business. Urgent business. Daniel's flashlight beam skimmed the license plate. The number, stuck in his mind, so he keyed it into his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. Running a plate." The reply came back in seconds. Registered to Carl Bennett. No priors. Local address. A good citizen on paper. Nothing out of the ordinary. But Daniel felt the shift, the subtle, invisible weight of Ranger's certainty. The dog's whole body screamed, "Something's inside." For a moment, Daniel just stood there, jaw tight, caught between doubt and instinct. He'd been in uniform long enough to know you can't pop open someone's trunk on a hunch. He'd also been with Ranger long enough to know that when this dog said danger, you listened. The neighborhood was still as he wrestled with the choice. A porch light flicked off down the street. A cicada droned in the trees. Life moved on around him, unaware that in this one ordinary car something extraordinary might be happening. Ranger growled low, pressing his body against the trunk, teeth bared in frustration. "All right, buddy," Daniel whispered, a knot tightening in his chest. "I hear you." That's when footsteps approached. Daniel turned sharply, hand resting near his holster. A man in his 50s came into view, holding 2 grocery bags against his chest. He wore a thin smile, though his eyes darted nervously. "Evening, officer," he said lightly, adjusting the bags. "Something wrong with my car?" Daniel studied him. "Yours?" "Yes, sir." The man chuckled weakly. "Just ran down to the store. Is there a problem?" Ranger barked so hard the man flinched, almost dropping a carton of milk. "Whoa, hey now, settle your dog, would you?" The man's smile was stretched too thin, his voice quivering just enough to betray him. Daniel's gut twisted again. On the surface, the man was polite, maybe a little rattled by the attention. But his hands shook as he shifted the bags. And Ranger wasn't letting up. "Sorry about him," Daniel said evenly, tugging on the leash but keeping his eyes fixed. "He's usually calmer. Must be something about tonight." The man forced a laugh. "Well, dogs sense all kinds of things, right? Probably just the groceries." But Ranger wasn't sniffing the groceries. He was pawing the trunk again, claws scraping the metal, barking louder now, more insistent. And that muffled sound, the faint cry Daniel had heard earlier, echoed in his mind. Could it be? The man shifted, trying to edge past Daniel toward the driver's door. "Look, officer, I've got ice cream melting in here. Mind if I get going?" Daniel blocked him with a quiet firmness, the weight of the moment settling hard. "Hold on a second, sir," he said. His tone was calm, but his chest was tight. "I just need you to stay right here." Ranger's bark split the night again, and this time Daniel didn't try to calm him. Something was very, very wrong, and deep down Daniel knew. He wasn't hearing things. He wasn't imagining it. There was more to this car than met the eye. Ranger's bark echoed off the quiet houses, sharp and insistent, the kind of sound that could rattle even the calmest nerves. Porch lights flicked on here and there as curious. Neighbors peeked through curtains, but no one stepped outside. It was just Daniel Harris, his K-9 partner, and the man who claimed the sedan. The man, Carl Bennett, if the registration was to be believed, shifted his grocery bags again, trying to look casual. But casual didn't usually come with a sheen of sweat on the forehead and hands that shook so hard the milk carton inside the bag rattled. "Officer," he said, his voice strained but light. "If the dog's got an issue with me, I'm sorry, but I really need to put these away before they spoil." Ranger growled low, his nose pressed against the trunk seam as if the metal itself might part for him. Daniel felt that familiar tug of war inside. The law required probable cause, yet the instincts screaming through his partner were hard to ignore. "Sir," Daniel said carefully, "mind stepping back from the car for just a minute?" Carl hesitated, his smile twitching. "Is that really necessary?" "Yes," Daniel replied firmly, softening the edge with a neighborly tone. "Just routine." The man didn't like it, Daniel could tell. His eyes darted between the officer, the dog, and the trunk, like a poker player staring at the one card that could ruin his hand. Daniel keyed his mic again, his voice even. "Dispatch, Unit 3. I've got a vehicle that my partner's alerting. Can I get another unit in my location?" The radio crackled back. "Copy that, Unit 3. Back up en route." Ranger barked again, pawing harder, claws screeching faintly on the metal. His entire body quivered with urgency. Daniel bent slightly, laying a steadying hand on the dog's harness, whispering so only Ranger could hear. "Easy, buddy. I hear you. Just give me a minute." But Ranger wasn't calming. If anything, his determination grew stronger, pulling forward, desperate to make Daniel see what he already sensed. Carl cleared his throat. "Listen, officer, I don't mean any disrespect, but I think you're making a mistake. This is just a regular car, my car. I bought groceries, I'm headed home, that's all." Daniel studied him. "Where do you live, Mr. Bennett?" "Across town," the man answered quickly. Too quickly. "On Willow Lane." Daniel nodded slowly, keeping his expression neutral. Willow Lane was real. He drove it often, but that didn't mean Carl belonged there. "You live alone?" Daniel asked casually. Carl's smile returned, stretched thin. "Yeah, just me." "Family nearby?" "Nope, just me," Carl said again, his voice sharper now. "Like I said, I've got ice cream in here, and I'd appreciate if you let me get on my way." Daniel tilted his head slightly. It was the kind of over-explaining that always made his stomach tighten. The man had mentioned ice cream twice in less than a minute, as if it were some kind of shield against suspicion. Ranger interrupted, barking louder, lunging at the trunk with such force Daniel had to pull him back. The leash stretched taut, muscles in the dog's neck straining. "Something wrong with the trunk?" Daniel asked, keeping his eyes on Carl. Carl's face tightened. "No, It's fine. The latch sticks sometimes, that's all. Mind popping it open for me? The silence that followed was heavier than anything Daniel had felt all night. Carl's eyes went flat, his smile finally gone. I don't think that's necessary, he said stiffly. Daniel held his gaze. If it's just groceries, like you said, then it should only take a second. Carl's jaw clenched. His fingers twitched against the grocery bag handles. He shifted his weight, his body angling slightly as if preparing to bolt. Daniel straightened, placing himself between Carl and the driver's side door. The street was quiet, but the tension buzzed like a live wire. Mr. Bennett, Daniel said, evenly, let's make this simple. Step away from the car until my backup arrives. Carl's breathing quickened. You've got no reason to hold me here. I've got reason enough, Daniel said, his hand brushing near his radio. My partner hasn't been wrong in 6 years. If he says there's something here, I trust him. Carl's face darkened. It's a dog. Dogs bark at all kinds of things. Ranger snarled in response, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated in the night air. Daniel felt it deep in his bones. Whatever was inside that trunk wasn't just groceries. The moment stretched. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities. A stash of drugs, stolen property, maybe something worse. The Amber Alert still rang in his ears. Emily Parker, 7 years old, last seen in a pink shirt. Could Ranger really have picked up her scent? Here? Carl suddenly shifted, stepping closer, his eyes darting to the open space behind Daniel as if gauging an escape. Stay right there, Daniel warned, his tone sharp now. Carl froze, the smile gone for good. Ranger barked once more, claws, scraping at the trunk, a desperate urgency that made Daniel's skin crawl. And for the first time that night, Daniel let the fear creep in, not for himself, but for what he might find when that trunk finally opened. The sound of another set of footsteps carried across the quiet street. Daniel turned sharply, body tense, his hand resting close to his sidearm. Ranger shifted with him, hackles raised, every muscle coiled and ready. Out of the dim glow of a porch light stepped the man Daniel had been waiting for, though not in the way he expected. Mid-50s, thinning gray hair, glasses perched low on his nose, arms full of grocery bags. The man's smile appeared polite enough, but it wavered the moment Ranger's bark cracked through the air. Evening, officer, the man said, adjusting the weight of his bags. His voice carried a nervous tremor even though the words were meant to sound friendly. Something wrong with my car? Daniel studied him closely. The sedan's registration had come back to a Carl Bennett, and the man in front of him seemed to fit the name well enough. Still, Daniel's gut told him this wasn't going to be a simple meet and greet. It yours? Daniel asked evenly. Yes, sir. Carl's chuckle was thin, hollow. Just ran down to the store, picked up a few things. Is there a problem? Ranger erupted again, lunging so hard on the leash that Daniel had to tighten his grip. Carl flinched, nearly dropping one of the bags. A milk carton thudded against his leg as he fumbled to keep hold. Whoa. Hey now, Carl said, his voice rising, his forced smile fading. Could you maybe get him under control? Daniel's eyes didn't leave Carl's face. He's usually calm, he said, his voice measured, almost apologetic. But tonight he seems to have picked up on something. Carl gave a quick laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Probably the groceries. Dogs loved the smell of meat. But Ranger wasn't sniffing at the grocery bags. His nose stayed glued to the trunk seam, claws scraping as though he could dig straight through to whatever was hidden inside. Daniel cleared his throat, shifting slightly to stand more squarely between Carl and the driver's side door. Where you headed, Mr. Bennett? Carl adjusted his glasses, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Home, he said quickly. Willow Lane. Daniel nodded slowly. Willow Lane was a real street on the far side of town, but the answer had come too fast, like Carl had rehearsed it. You live alone? Daniel asked, his tone light, almost conversational. Carl's lips tightened. Yeah, just me. Any family nearby? Nope. The answer was clipped, sharper this time. Like I said, it's just me. Ranger growled again, low and guttural, a sound that made Carl glance nervously at the trunk. Daniel's chest tightened. Every instinct told him this was more than nerves. The sweat beating on Carl's temple, the twitch in his jaw, the way his eyes avoided the trunk. All of it piled into a case Daniel couldn't yet prove but could feel in his bones. Still, the law was the law. He couldn't demand the trunk be opened without something concrete. That's what made these moments so heavy, the fine line between suspicion and action. Carl shifted again, his voice taking on a harder edge. Look, officer, I've got frozen food in here. I don't mean to be rude, but I need to get home. Daniel didn't budge. You mind waiting until my backup gets here? Carl's jaw tightened, his polite mask slipping another inch. Backup? For what? Routine, Daniel said simply. Just making sure everything's okay. The silence between them stretched. A breeze stirred the leaves overhead, and somewhere down the block a dog barked back at Ranger's furious growls. The entire neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath. Carl licked his lips. You don't need backup, he said, his tone sharper now. I told you there's nothing wrong with my car. Ranger snapped again at the trunk, barking so loudly the sound bounced off the houses. Daniel kept his tone calm but firm. Then it won't be an issue when another officer takes a look with me, right? Carl's face twitched. His fingers tightened around the bag handles until his knuckles went white. For a moment, Daniel thought the man might actually set the groceries down and run. The tension was thick, and Ranger seemed to sense it, lunging once more against the leash. Carl blew out a shaky breath, trying for another smile that didn't quite land. You're blowing this out of proportion. I'm just a guy with groceries. Daniel's voice hardened, just slightly. Maybe so, but my partner says different, and I've learned to trust him. The man swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. His gaze flicked once more toward the trunk, and Daniel caught it. A quick glance, but telling. The sound of a siren wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder. Backup was closing in. Carl's face drained of color at the sound. Daniel noticed, his suspicion tightening into near certainty. He leaned slightly toward the trunk, speaking low but clear enough for Carl to hear. What is it, Ranger? What do you smell? The shepherd whined now, a high-pitched sound, pressing his body firmly against the metal, pawing again with urgency. His entire frame trembled as though he couldn't understand why the humans weren't already opening the thing. Carl's voice snapped suddenly, breaking the tense silence. I told you it's just groceries. His tone was too loud, too sharp, a desperate attempt to drown out the truth Ranger was already screaming in his own way. Daniel steadied himself. He wasn't going to push further until his partner arrived, but in his gut, he already knew. This wasn't about groceries. He looked, Carl square in the eye, his voice steady. Then you won't mind proving it? Carl froze. His mouth opened, then shut again. The false smile was gone now, replaced by something colder. And in that moment, Daniel Harris realized he wasn't dealing with an ordinary man running errands. He was standing face to face with someone hiding a secret. And Ranger wasn't going to let him walk away until the truth came out. The wail of the distant siren grew louder, a steady reminder that Daniel's backup was closing in. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The quiet street, the dark sedan, the man in front of him who couldn't seem to stop sweating, and Ranger, relentless, pawing and whining at the trunk as though his very soul depended on it. Carl Bennett's thin smile was long gone now. His jaw worked nervously and his eyes flicked between Daniel and the trunk in rapid, twitchy glances. He still clutched his grocery bags, though his knuckles had turned pale from the strain. Mr. Bennett, Daniel said evenly, I need you to take a step back from the vehicle. Carl's lips parted, but no words came out right away. His breathing was heavier now, like every inhale cost him something. Officer, I really don't see why this is necessary. I told you it's just my car, nothing more. Ranger growled again, loud and sharp, his claws screeching against the metal as he clawed at the trunk seam. The sound sent a shiver up Daniel's spine. I hear you. Daniel murmured under his breath, squeezing the leash, steadying his partner. Carl shifted, trying once again to move around Daniel toward the driver's side door. Daniel stepped sideways, cutting him off. The two men were now only a few feet apart. "I said step back," Daniel repeated, his voice harder now. Carl's face twitched. "You can't keep me here without reason," he snapped. Daniel held his gaze, calm but unyielding. "My partners, alerting on your car, that's reason enough to wait until backup arrives." Carl let out a short, bitter laugh, but it didn't hide the tremor in his voice. "It's a dog. Dogs bark at squirrels, at shadows. You're going to detain me because your mutt doesn't like my car?" Ranger snarled at the insult, lunging forward. Daniel had to tighten the leash, but he didn't correct the dog this time. Not tonight. Tonight he trusted Ranger more than anything else. The siren was closer now. Carl heard it too, and his body went rigid. The fear in his eyes gave way to something darker, something Daniel didn't like one bit. "You don't understand," Carl muttered suddenly, almost to himself. His gaze flicked to the trunk again. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Why don't you help me understand, then?" Carl's chest rose and fell faster, his breath uneven. He set one of the grocery bags down on the ground with a dull thud, but the other stayed locked in his grip like a lifeline. "This is ridiculous. You've got no idea what you're doing." Daniel's voice was steady, but inside he felt the churn of adrenaline. "Then tell me what I'm missing." Carl shook his head, eyes darting, sweat rolling down his temple. He looked less like a man defending his rights and more like someone cornered, trapped with no way out. Ranger barked sharply, the kind of bark Daniel knew by heart, the pay attention now bark, the one that meant this wasn't a drill, wasn't a false lead. The neighbors were watching now, curtains shifting behind lit windows. Someone whispered on a porch across the street. The whole block could feel the tension. Carl snapped his head toward the houses. "They're all watching, aren't they?" His voice cracked, almost hysterical. "You've turned me into some kind of criminal in front of my own neighbors." Daniel didn't flinch. "Nobody's judging you yet. Just open the trunk and we'll clear this up." Carl's face twisted, his eyes going hard. "I don't have to." "You do if I have." "Probable cause," Daniel replied firmly. "And right now I do." The backup cruiser turned onto the street, red and blue lights reflecting off the windows of the quiet homes. Carl's breath hitched at the sight, and Daniel caught it. The unmistakable panic of someone whose time had just run out. "Step away." "From the car," Daniel ordered, louder this time, authority filling his tone. Carl's voice rose with desperation. "You're wrong. You're making a mistake." "Then prove me wrong," Daniel shot back. "Open the trunk." Carl's hands shook violently now. The grocery bag slipped from his grip and toppled onto the pavement, spilling a loaf of bread and a carton of eggs that cracked open on the asphalt. The mess spread at his feet, but he didn't even look at it. His eyes stayed glued on Daniel, wide and darting like a cornered animal. Ranger barked again, thrashing at the trunk with everything in him, the leash straining to hold him back. Daniel's hand hovered near his holster. He didn't want this to turn ugly, but Carl's every move screamed volatility. He'd seen this kind of panic before, the moment when fear tipped into recklessness. "Don't do anything stupid," Daniel said carefully, trying to keep his voice level. "Just stay where you are until we sort this out." Carl's chest heaved. He took a step forward, then froze, eyes flicking once more toward the trunk. His lips parted, but no words came. The second unit pulled in behind Daniel's cruiser, lights flashing. Another officer stepped out, hand on his weapon, reading the situation quickly. Daniel gave a small nod in his direction, never breaking eye. "Contact with Carl." "You're not going anywhere until we open that trunk," Daniel said firmly. Carl's face drained of color. His shoulders slumped just for a moment before stiffening again. "You don't get it," he whispered. His voice was thin, cracked. "You don't get what you're about to find." Daniel's stomach tightened. His heart thudded in his chest. He didn't like the sound of that, not one bit. Ranger whined now, a high-pitched sound of urgency, as if begging Daniel to act faster. Daniel straightened, bracing himself. "Then you'd better start explaining, Mr. Bennett, because the longer You stall, the worse this gets for you. Carl's eyes darted wildly, his body trembling as though every nerve inside him had been set on fire. And in that instant, Daniel knew. The secret inside that trunk wasn't just about stolen goods or contraband. It was something far darker. Something his K9 partner had sensed long before he had. The flashing red and blue lights from the backup cruiser washed across the street, painting the quiet neighborhood in uneasy colors. Another officer, a younger man named Torres, stepped out and immediately assessed the scene. His eyes flicked from Daniel's steady stance to Carl Bennett's trembling frame, and then to Ranger, who was practically tearing himself apart trying to get into the trunk. Torres rested his hand on his holster and spoke low. "What have we got?" Daniel didn't take his eyes off Carl. "Dog's been alerting on the trunk. Hard. He hasn't let up once." Torres nodded, lips pressed tight. His gaze shifted to Carl, whose eyes had gone wide and glassy. The man was cornered, sweat streaming down his temple, his grocery bag long forgotten on the pavement where eggs bled across the asphalt. "Mr. Bennett," Daniel said firmly, raising his voice just enough to cut through Ranger's barking. "You need to step away from the vehicle, right now." Carl shook his head, his hands twitching at his sides. "You don't understand," he muttered, the same line he'd whispered before. "You don't understand what you're about to do." "Then make me understand," Daniel countered. His voice was calm, steady, but his muscles were coiled, ready. Carl's breathing turned ragged. He shifted his feet, edging slightly toward the driver's door. Daniel stepped with him, blocking the move. "Don't," Daniel warned, sharp now. "Stay put." Carl's eyes darted to the trunk, then to the flashing lights, then back to Daniel. His panic was plain. And then, without warning, he lunged. It happened fast. Carl dropped his remaining grocery bag and shoved hard at Daniel's shoulder, trying to push past him. Daniel staggered but didn't go down. Ranger launched forward in the same heartbeat, his body a blur of fur and muscle. The dog hit Carl square in the chest, driving him backward onto the pavement. Carl let out a grunt as he hit the ground, arms flailing. Ranger planted himself over the man, growling low, his teeth bared inches from Carl's throat. "Ranger, hold!" Daniel commanded, yanking the leash back just enough to keep the dog controlled but still pressing his weight onto the suspect. Carl froze, breathing heavy, eyes wide with terror. He didn't dare move. Torres was there in seconds, grabbing Carl's wrists and yanking them behind his back. The metallic snap of handcuffs echoed sharp in the night. "You're making a mistake," Carl spat, his voice cracking between anger and fear. "You've got no right, no right. You shoved an officer," Torres said flatly. "That's enough right there." Daniel crouched down, catching his breath, his pulse still racing. Ranger stood firm, eyes locked on Carl as if daring him to twitch. "Why'd you run?" Daniel asked quietly, though there was no softness in the question. Carl's face twisted. "Because you won't understand. None of you will understand." Neighbors were gathering now, drawn by the flashing lights and noise. An older man in a bathrobe stood on his porch. A woman clutched her robe at the chest, whispering something Daniel couldn't hear. The street, moments ago peaceful, was alive with murmurs and fear. Torres pulled Carl to his feet. "You've got two choices," he said. "Talk now, or wait until we open that trunk." Carl's body jerked at the words. His face drained of color, and for the briefest moment Daniel saw something flicker in his eyes. Terror, pure and raw. He shook his head violently. "Don't. You don't know what you're doing." Daniel stepped closer. Ranger pressed tight to his side. "Then tell me, what's in there?" Carl's lips moved, but no words came out. His entire body shook like a leaf in the wind. Torres started toward the trunk, but Daniel lifted a hand to stop him. He could feel it in his bones. This wasn't a moment to rush. The suspect was seconds away from cracking, and sometimes words gave more than brute force. Carl twisted in Torres's grip, his voice breaking. "Please, don't open it. Please. You'll ruin everything." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You've already ruined plenty, Mr. Bennett. The only way this ends clean for you is if you start talking." Ranger growled again, his stare unwavering. The dog's instincts screamed urgency, and Daniel trusted those instincts more than any words spilling from the suspect's mouth. Carl's breathing turned into ragged gasps. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't let you." "Then you're only digging deeper," Daniel said. His voice was steady, firm, but underneath his chest was tight. The flashing lights painted Carl's face in harsh colors, red, blue, making him look less like a man and more like a ghost caught in between. The suspect dropped his head, shaking it slowly. "You'll hate me," he muttered. "Everyone will hate me when you see." Daniel's stomach turned, but he didn't let it show. "Whatever's in that trunk," he said, "my job is to deal with it. Ranger's job is to find it, and he's never wrong." Torres gave Daniel a questioning look. Daniel nodded once. "Enough stalling. Secure him in the car," Daniel ordered. Torres dragged Carl toward the backup cruiser, the man still muttering under his breath, still shaking his head. His words carried faintly back. "You'll see. You'll all see." Daniel knelt briefly, rubbing Ranger's head, grounding himself in the moment. The dog's eyes were sharp, his body vibrating with energy. He was ready. Daniel looked at the trunk. The silence from within was deafening, more haunting than any sound could have been. He exhaled slowly, knowing they were only seconds away from the truth. And for the first time all night, Daniel felt the weight of dread settle heavy in his gut. The night had grown so still that even the cicadas seemed to fall silent. The only sounds were the hum of engines, the faint crackle of radios, and Ranger's steady, urgent whine as he pawed again at the sedan's trunk. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, staring at the metal lid as if it were some sealed vault holding back more than just air. He had opened plenty of trunks in his career. Most of the time it was drugs, sometimes stolen property. But never had he felt this kind of weight pressing down on him. This one felt different. Torres returned after securing Carl in the back of the cruiser. The suspect's muffled voice still echoed in Daniel's head, pleading, warning, almost chanting that they didn't understand what they were about to do. Torres adjusted his vest and gave Daniel a look. "We doing this?" Daniel's hand brushed the trunk latch. His chest tightened. He looked down at Ranger. The shepherd's body trembled with intensity, eyes sharp, tail stiff, ears pinned forward. He gave a sharp bark, then whined again, pawing once more. "Yeah," Daniel said finally, his voice low. "We're doing this." Daniel pulled on gloves. His hands shook just slightly, though he hoped no one noticed. The neighbors were watching from their porches and windows, faces pale in the glow of flashing lights. Torres stepped closer, weapon drawn just in case. "On 3, he said. Daniel nodded. 1, 2, 3. The trunk latch clicked, the sound snapping like thunder in the silence. Daniel lifted slowly, the hinges groaning. For a second, the darkness inside seemed endless. Then the beam of his flashlight cut through. Gasps broke from the crowd before Daniel could even process what he saw. Curled in the corner of the trunk was a small figure, a girl, no older than 7. Her wrists were bound loosely with duct tape, her mouth gagged with a strip of cloth. Her wide eyes blinked furiously against the sudden light, tears streaking her dirty cheeks. Emily Parker. The name thundered in Daniel's mind. The Amber Alert. The missing child. She was right here, in front of him. Alive. For half a heartbeat, Daniel couldn't move. His breath caught in his chest, his throat tightening. Then Ranger barked loudly, the sound shaking him into action. "Emily," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking despite himself. He dropped to his knees, reaching carefully. "You're safe now, sweetheart. We've got you." The girl whimpered, shrinking back at first. But when Daniel gently removed the gag, her voice came out cracked and small. "Mommy?" Daniel's chest ached. "We'll get you to her," he promised. "I swear it." He pulled out his pocket knife, cutting away the tape. Emily's tiny arm shot around his neck the moment they were free, clinging to him as if letting go meant she'd vanish again. Daniel held her tight, His jaw clenched against the flood of emotion threatening to overtake him. Torres's voice cracked behind him. Holy God. He turned quickly, speaking into the radio. Dispatch, we have the child. Repeat, we have the child, alive. Request immediate medical and notify the family. Daniel stood slowly, Emily wrapped against him like a fragile bird. She buried her face into his uniform, her tears soaking through the fabric. Ranger stood close, tail wagging low, sniffing her gently before licking her hand. The girl gave the faintest laugh through her sobs, a sound so fragile and broken that it shattered what little control Daniel had left. You're safe now, he murmured again, stroking her hair. We've got you. Neighbors gasped and cried quietly from their porches. One woman covered her mouth with both hands, whispering, Thank you, Lord. An older man crossed himself, his lips moving in silent prayer. The entire street seemed to release a collective breath of relief and disbelief that such a horror had been hidden in plain sight. The neighborhood had gone quiet again, except for the low murmur of radios and the rustle of uniforms moving about. The flashing red and blue lights pulsed across the street, reflecting off windows and parked cars, a strobe of chaos against the otherwise peaceful night. But all of that noise fell away when Daniel lifted Emily Parker from the trunk. The little girl clung to him like she was afraid the world might swallow her whole if she let go. Her arms were thin, trembling, her face streaked with tears and grime. Her pink shirt was wrinkled, damp with sweat, her small denim shorts twisted from hours curled in that dark space. It's okay, sweetheart, Daniel whispered as he carried her toward the ambulance waiting at the curb. You're safe now. You hear me? You're safe. Ranger padded beside him, his gait steady, his eyes locked on the child as if guarding every step. The shepherd's chest rose and fell quickly, still running on adrenaline, but he whined softly, a sound of reassurance rather than warning. Paramedics rushed forward, their hands gentle but urgent. One of them wrapped a blanket around Emily, but the girl didn't release her grip on Daniel's neck. I want my mom, she whispered, her voice so faint Daniel had to lean in to hear it. The words hit him hard, sharper than any order he'd ever taken. He nodded, his throat tight. We're getting her. Don't you worry. As if on cue, a frantic cry pierced the night. Emily. Daniel turned just as a woman sprinted through the line of officers, her face twisted in desperation. Her hair was disheveled, her shoes barely on her feet, but none of that mattered. It was the sound in her voice, the raw, breaking sound of a mother calling for her child, that froze the street in its tracks. The officers parted instinctively, allowing her through. Emily, she cried again, tears streaming down her cheeks. Emily's head jerked up from Daniel's shoulder, her eyes wide. Mom! The girl wriggled free from Daniel's hold and ran the last few feet, launching herself into her mother's arms. The collision nearly knocked the woman off balance, but she didn't. Kare. She sank to her knees on the pavement, clutching her daughter so tightly it looked as though she might never let go again. The sobs that followed weren't quiet, weren't delicate. They were loud, unrestrained, echoing off the houses as mother and child wept together. Emily buried her face in her mother's chest, tiny fingers clinging to the fabric of her blouse. The woman rocked back and forth, kissing the top of her daughter's head, repeating the same words over and over. You're safe, I've got you. Neighbors watching from porches wiped their own tears, whispering prayers of thanks. Even the paramedics paused for a moment, their professional urgency giving way to human compassion as they witnessed the reunion. Daniel swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes. He wasn't a stranger to rescues, but moments like this, the raw humanity of them, always cut through the uniform, through the badge, through the training. Ranger stepped closer, his ears perked as if seeking permission to join. Emily spotted him through her tears and released one arm from her mother's grasp. The doggy, she whispered. Her mother looked up, confused for a moment, until Emily pulled back just enough to add, He saved me. The shepherd sat patiently, eyes steady, his body quiet but alert. Daniel gave a small nod. Go ahead, he said gently, Emily reached out with trembling fingers, brushing them through Ranger's thick fur. The dog lowered his head, accepting the touch, and then leaned into her small embrace. For the first time that night, Emily's sobs broke into a shaky smile. Her mother looked at Daniel, her voice trembling. How did you find her?" Daniel glanced down at Ranger, who still hadn't moved from Emily's side. "It wasn't me," he said softly. "It was him. He wouldn't stop until we got to her." The woman's tears fell harder. She reached out with her free hand, stroking Ranger's head. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me my little girl back." Ranger blinked slowly, calm and unassuming, as if he didn't understand the gravity of what he'd done. To him it was just his job, but to everyone else, it was nothing short of a miracle. Torres approached quietly, speaking in a low voice so as not to disturb the moment. "Suspects secured. He's not saying much, but he'll be booked tonight. Federal charges are a given." Daniel nodded, though his attention stayed on Emily and her mother. "Good. We'll let the detectives take it from here." Torres followed his gaze. His expression softened. "That right there makes it worth it, doesn't it?" Daniel exhaled slowly, the knot in his chest finally loosening. "Yeah, that right there." The paramedics eventually convinced the mother to let them check Emily, though she never once released her daughter's hand. The little girl stayed wrapped in her blanket, holding tight to both her mother and Ranger whenever he was near. Case go. Street buzzed with quiet conversations now. Officers exchanged nods, neighbors whispered relief, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the late hour. Life in the small town would go on, but it would never forget this night. Daniel rested a hand on Ranger's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. The shepherd finally seemed calmer, his duty fulfilled. "You did good, buddy," Daniel murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Real good." Ranger leaned into the touch, eyes half closing as if he finally allowed himself to relax. And as the night carried on, the image of Emily in her mother's arms burned itself into Daniel's memory, a reminder of why he wore the badge, why he trusted his partner, and why sometimes the most extraordinary heroes walked on four legs. The hours that followed blurred into a steady rhythm of flashing lights, paperwork, and whispered conversations. But none of that mattered nearly as much as the image burned into every witness's mind. A little girl wrapped in her mother's arms, safe again because one dog refused to give up. By the time the ambulance pulled away with Emily and her mother, the neighborhood had quieted down. A few neighbors lingered on porches, arms folded against the night chill, whispering prayers of thanks. Others stepped forward to pat Daniel on the shoulder or call out words of encouragement. But more often than not, their eyes drifted to Ranger. "That dog's a blessing," an elderly woman murmured as she clutched her robe tight. "An angel in fur, that's what he is." Daniel didn't argue. He simply glanced down at his partner, who sat calmly at his side, chest still heaving from the night's exertion. Ranger's ears twitched at the sounds around him, but his amber eyes remained steady, watchful, as if guarding not just his handler, but the whole street. At the station later, after Carl Bennett had been booked and detectives had begun piecing together the details of his twisted plan, Daniel sat on the front steps with Ranger. The cool air carried the faint smell of rain, and the glow from the overhead light painted the pair in soft tones. Ranger lay stretched out at Daniel's feet, his head resting on his paws. For the first time that night, he looked truly at ease. Daniel rubbed his partner's ears, letting out a long breath. "You did it, boy. You saved her." The shepherd flicked his tail, a small thump against the concrete, as if to say he didn't need the praise. To Ranger, it had been instinct duty, the unshakable bond between man and dog that demanded he never ignore a cry for help. But Daniel knew better. He knew that without Ranger's nose, without his persistence, a little girl's life would have slipped into darkness. News spread quickly. By morning, headlines carried the story: K9 saves missing girl found in car trunk. The local paper ran a photo of Emily holding onto Ranger's neck, her small hands gripping his fur as if he were the only safe place left in the world. At the diner the next day, older men tipped their hats at Daniel. Mothers with children stopped to shake his hand and thank him. One grandmother pressed a small silver cross into his palm and whispered, "For your dog. May God keep him safe." Daniel didn't correct her. He just smiled and tucked it into his pocket. When Emily was discharged from the hospital, her family invited Daniel and Ranger to their home. The living room was filled with balloons and flowers, but the loudest sound came from laughter, the kind of laughter that only comes after days of fear finally break into relief. Emily knelt on the carpet, hugging Ranger so tight her mother had to remind her to give the dog some room to breathe. Ranger tolerated it all with patience, licking her cheek every time she buried her face in his fur. Her mother approached Daniel with tears in her eyes. "There aren't enough words," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I lost her. But you and Ranger, you gave her back to me." Daniel shook his head. "It was all him. I just followed his lead." The woman smiled softly, glancing at the dog. "Then thank God for dogs like him." Weeks later, the town held a small ceremony on the courthouse lawn. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it didn't need to be. Families gathered with children in tow, veterans saluted, and the mayor presented. Ranger with a medal attached to a sturdy leather collar. As the mayor pinned the medal in place, the crowd erupted into applause. Children clapped with wide eyes, mothers wiped at tears, and fathers nodded with solemn respect. Ranger sat tall, ears perked, though his tail wagged just slightly at the noise. Daniel leaned down, whispering with a grin, "Looks like they all know what I've known for years. You're the real hero." The dog barked once, sharp and proud, earning another round of applause. That night, when the crowd had dispersed and the streets were quiet again, Daniel returned home with Ranger. He poured himself a cup of coffee, sat in the worn recliner by the window, and watched his partner curl up on the rug. The house was still, but Daniel's mind replayed the events. Emily's muffled cry, Ranger's relentless scratching at the trunk, the reunion between mother and daughter. He thought about all the moments that could have gone differently if he hadn't listened, if he hadn't trusted. Trust. That was the word that stayed with him. Trust in his partner, trust in instinct, trust that sometimes the smallest signs pointed to the greatest truths. As Ranger drifted into sleep, Daniel reached down, resting a hand on the dog's shoulder. "Good work, buddy," he whispered. "You gave that little girl her future back." And in the quiet of that room, Daniel realized he'd been given something too. A reminder that even in a world full of shadows, loyalty and courage could still light the way. Closing for audience, thank you for staying with us through this story. Ranger's loyalty and courage remind us of the quiet heroes who walk beside us every day. What about you? If you were in Daniel's shoes, would you have trusted the canine's instincts even when everything looked ordinary?